The problem is, for much of President Obama's term, Congress simply didn't do its job. The two sessions of Congress that convened from 2011 to 2014 were among the least productive in modern history, leading pundits to resurrect the Truman-era title, the Do-Nothing Congress. Instead of taking on the major public policy issues of the day, Republicans in Congress spent their energy on things like voting, unsuccessfully, more than 60 times to repeal or restrict Obamacare. Believe it or not, this dithering was part of a longer-term political strategy. The leader of the Senate Republicans, Mitch McConnell, straight up told an interviewer, a couple of months before this period began, "The single most important thing we want to achieve is for President Obama to be a one-term president." They obviously failed in that endeavor, and 4 years later, when his party gained control of the Senate, he told the Washington Post he was trying to ensure that the Republican Party avoids appearing scary to voters ahead of the 2016 presidential contest, and to not mess up the playing field, if you will, for whoever the nominee ultimately is. The Republican leadership basically admitted that pursuing a Republican agenda would reflect poorly on their eventual nominee. Some conservatives eventually got fed up with the inaction. The Weekly Standard's Stephen Hayes lamented the fact that, despite attaining a majority in the House of Representatives, Republicans were not advancing a bolder agenda and were dragging their feet on ripe conservative issues like tax reform. Confronted by a stubborn and stagnant Congress, President Obama has not been bashful about his use of executive orders. In that 2014 State of the Union, he asserted, "America does not stand still, and neither will I. So wherever and whenever I can take steps without legislation to expand opportunity for more American families, that's what I'm going to do." He promised to make that year a year of action, and confidently reminded Congress he wielded a pen and a phone to assist him when Congress would not. Surely enough, by the end of that year, the president had issued more than 80 new executive actions designed to shore up the economic recovery, mitigate climate change, and bring some overdue sanity to our immigration enforcement. Each of these topics will be discussed in detail in this audiobook, but for now, the core question remains: has President Obama abused his executive powers by issuing so many executive orders? Let me answer this with a fun fact that makes my conservative friends' heads spin. President Obama has actually made fewer executive orders per year than any president since Grover Cleveland left office in 1897. If Obama's critics think he's overreaching, I wonder what they think about Calvin Coolidge and Franklin Roosevelt, and all the other presidents of the first half of the 20th century, each of whom issued roughly 5 times as many executive orders as Obama. Of course, the sheer number of executive orders doesn't tell a full story about a president's use of executive authority. Executive orders can address minor bureaucratic issues or more substantive policy issues. Many of them simply reverse a previous president's executive order, while some substantially set new precedent. President Obama has indeed exercised bold action on the immigration, environmental, and economic fronts. Because of his intervention, law enforcement has prioritized the detention of felons not families, and 97% of undocumented immigrants who are now detained are criminals or recent border crossers. Because of his initiative, China and the United States, the world's 2 biggest air polluters, have signed a pact agreeing to aggressively reduce their carbon emissions. And because of his influence, more than a dozen states have increased their minimum wage, improving the standard of living for roughly 7 million American workers. A few legal challenges have arisen to some of the president's initiatives. These checks and balances between the judiciary and the executive branches are, in fact, a wonderful thing. They're part of the self-regulating system our founding fathers designed. But one of the decisive features of the system is that ultimately it is a presidential, as opposed to a parliamentary, system of democracy. Our country's leader gains democratic legitimacy by being chosen directly by our citizenry, not by other politicians, as it works in the UK.